what if I told you that you could become better at learning new information? I'm here with Ulrich Boser, who's an expert in just that. Earlier this year, you wrote an article for Harvard Business Review that was really popular, and it talked about how people can actually become better learners. And you walked through 3 of those steps. That's something that's really important for our viewers in this age of disruption. Can you tell us one of these steps? How can somebody become a better learner?
Sure. One thing that I really recommend for people when it comes to learning to learn is what researchers call metacognition. It's about thinking about thinking. And so when you're reading something where you really want to get a sense of that material, and this applies to so many things, whether it's Excel pivot tables or golf, asking yourself, do I really know this? Could I explain this to a friend? These are questions that prompt us to think about our own thinking and make learning far more effective.
So is that one step that you would take, say, trying to explain it to another person or even to yourself to make sure that you have that information down?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that explaining things is actually another wonderful tool when it comes to learning. So explaining something to someone else or even explaining something to yourself, it encourages sort of that metacognition where we are thinking about our own thinking, but it also makes us engage in learning a little bit more actively, where we really have to make sure that we know that material. And certainly we've all had that experience where we think we know something and you explain to someone else and you're like, oh, I don't quite get it. And that's really a powerful tool.
Okay, well, what else can we do? What's another step that you highlight in your HBR article?
I think quizzing yourself, ton of evidence about it where it allows people to become much more effective learners. And this quizzing of ourselves can be really powerful in many ways. And what it really does is make us more active learners. So let's say, for instance, you're preparing for a speech. Don't reread your notes. Put your notes away and then, stand in an empty room and just give that speech. It's going to make you a more active learner and make sure that you're really kind of struggling to engage that material.
So I mentioned that we've been talking a lot with our members about learning new information, relearning. What is something else that you would do, that you take home to relearn new material?
Sure. When it comes to relearning new material, what I would really emphasize to people is that we forget. We forget all the time, and we forget how much we forget. This is one of the most enduring findings from the science of learning, and so you should just keep in mind that if you're going to board members or you're talking to clients, that they will have forgotten what you probably told them in that last meeting 3 months ago. And then the reverse is also true. If you're going to give a presentation on something that maybe you learned a couple of years ago, just make sure that you have some time to brush up on that beforehand. And another thing that's really important when it comes to learning is to spread your learning out over time. Anything you can do, in other words, to reduce cramming is going to make you a more effective learner.
So that's exactly what I was going to ask about, was cramming, because I know that's something that I did in school.
Yep.
I'm sure you did. Everybody's done it, but it's not effective.
Not effective. I think we all kind of know that cramming is not effective, and I'm thinking of what we did in college, right? Where you're like drinking coffee or all night long. But anything we can do to reduce cramming, another way to think about this is that you would learn more if you just did a little bit of studying of something each week. So let's say you wanted to get better at some type of a software tool or a programming tool. You'd be much better, instead of doing 3 study sessions, just over each weekend, you'd be much better off just studying for 15 minutes a day, because that fights back against that inevitable learning.
Do you have any thoughts on forgetting what you've already learned that you might not need to know anymore?
There's this funny thing when it comes to learning. We often think that forgetting is a bad thing, right? And certainly we've all had the experience where we can't find our cell phones and we're like, oh no, where'd it go? But forgetting can be really powerful, and I think many of us had this experience, like in a small way, where you write an email one night and you're like, you got to send it to your boss, so you wait the next morning, you're like, oh my gosh, how did I have so many errors in it? We can use that, and it's basically an example of forgetting. When you sleep and you review that material, it's helpful, but we can use that a lot for our own benefit, to allow ourselves time to forget. So that means starting on that stuff that you really don't want to study a little bit earlier. Give yourself time, even 5 minutes, to move to another task and then return to it. That type of forgetting basically gives us a new perspective on material and allows us to engage in much richer ways.
Okay, so we have 3 good tips so far. So it's okay to forget things. Quiz yourself, make sure that you know it.
Yep.
What else can we do?
I think the third one I'd emphasize is really metacognition, because we are so often overconfident. And let me explain that for a second, because some overconfidence is a good thing. I mean, frankly, I would not be here talking to you if I was not overconfident. But when it comes to learning, overconfidence, where we think we know something, but we really don't know the details, is a bad thing. So really make sure that you know exactly what you know. A fourth thing, because we're just kind of running through these, I think, tips that we really want people to use every day in their learning. Another one is analogies. Now, analogies are kind of this curious thing where we often associate them with IQ tests, or we associate them with kind of games and tests, but they're a great way to explain something and learn something new. We see that a lot, I think, in common tests where people will say, we need Uber but for haircuts, or we need Uber but for childcare. But you can use analogies in so many ways to help you understand something new, or explain something to a client where you're trying to figure out, what is a quick and easy way to explain a really complicated task. Use analogies, very powerful tool.
And if you're able to give that analogy, again, that shows that you know the information.
Exactly, you know the information. And what's key about the analogy, right, is that you need to use analogies in which the other people know kind of what you're talking about. I'm a big soccer fan, will say, someone is the Ronaldo of politics. Here in the U.S., people are not as familiar with Ronaldo as they should be. He's a fantastic soccer player. So, using analogies that your audience is going to know is going to be far more effective. So here in the U.S., let's say LeBron James would be a better analogy. So what's key about using analogies is to know the subject matter that you're trying to explain, but also be aware of your audience to make sure that they know that topic well, so they really grab that idea.
So we have some great tips about what we can do to become better learners. Is there anything that you found in popular culture, things that people have heard about learning that's just not accurate?
Sure. There are two things that I would mention. One is learning styles. It's a very common belief. Some people believe that they're auditory learners. Some people believe that they're visual learners. And there's really no evidence for that. I think people confuse basically a different idea, and that's this. We're all really visual learners. We acquire much more information through our eyes. And we also just have weak language for the fact that people are just different. So no evidence for auditory or visual learners. The second thing that I'd mention is highlighters or rereading, very common practices. You see them in colleges, you see them often in meeting rooms, but they're basically fairly passive ways to learn. Unless you're like highlighting and then repeating that material to yourself, it's not a great tool. It depends on how it's used, but I'd really encourage people to read material, then close the book and kind of quiz themselves, explain it to a friend. Far more powerful because it really forces you to be active.
Okay, well, you just completely destroyed a couple things that I thought, because I always thought that I had a particular learning style,
and
really? I highlight things. So
okay.
I have learned something today, and I'm going to take it and repeat it later so I don't forget it, and I might quiz some of my coworkers just to make sure that we all really have this knowledge.
I think it's very safe to say that you took something out of this conversation.
Well, hopefully our viewers did as well.
Great.
And thank you so much for joining us today and to help all of our members learn how to learn better.